extremely important. And I should be in a position to tell them, okay, you can use this particular theme, infrastructure, the collective unconscious, or, whatever the appropriate themes might be. But at the same time, there is a way in which I would also say that theory cannot be exhausted in a particular application. The relationship between application and theory is not that one-to-one. Okay to say, okay, you give me a theory, I need to know how to use it, absolutely. But if you say that somehow it can be exhausted in a particular use of it, and then you get the feeling, okay, that all of the other stuff is floating around but that I wasn't able to use, so that is where theory does simultaneously become usable. It is, in that sense, opportunistic, practical, but it's not just practical alone. There is a surplus, which cannot just be instantiated, okay, application 1, application 2, and it goes on, and then at the end of application 113, all of the theory has been exhausted. I think the relationship between theory and application to me is a little more complicated than that of a broad thing, instantiation. It is not one-to-one. So, does that make any sense? Thanks so much, Andre. Yeah, please, I'm sure there are other questions, I'm sure there are things that I've said. Yeah, please, Matt. Adam, what is it? Adam. Adam Kaiser.
Doing to sort of address the first part of the talk is this question, and I'll expand it a little bit, which is what is the public of the humanities? Because what I think you were pointing out in the beginning was a kind of discursive hardness emerging both and a separation both in corporate capital cultures and in humanistic disciplines, where these things don't seem to have a Venn diagram anymore. There's two circles. And at the same time, a kind of decline of what we might call the cultural middle ground. So that there are these like nature and science, which are scientific explanations to lay persons. There doesn't seem to quite be the human magazine that you have to read.
You should, given your work on mediated channel, do you want to say something more about what you think before I, because your work deals with those issues of McLuhan, modernism, kind of, it's partly popular, it's partly media studies, partly modernism. I would love to hear you say a little more. Are you conflicted? What would be your dilemmas in terms of who you think you're addressing? I'm asking you because I know I love your work.
Who am I? You, Radha? It's a dissertation. I don't know. Well, I mean, I think there was, a period of time in which cultural critics could appear on television and radio, and you could have Lionel Trilling talking with, Nabokov on television, prime time, exchanging what they thought about Lolita.
Let me ask you, how did they talk about it differently than they might have? Were they quote unquote making it more assimilable? Were they dumbing down? So what exactly was happening at that moment where he's, this is a different group of people. Ergo, what do I do? What is it that I should be doing here? Which should make it, would you say, work? So, any thoughts about that? What sorts of fine tuning or?
Well, in terms of that particular episode, you can all watch it on YouTube, if you're so inclined. It's a conversation, and it's done between a kind of in a mode of practical criticism, I suppose, between Trilling and Trilling's sort of nutty reading that Lolita is the seductress and poor pedophile, and Nabokov, who doesn't seem that interested. But there seems to be a way in which that does seem accessible and explained in a way that there seems to be no modern contemporary equivalent per se, at least in terms of literature. Culture.
Yeah.
Okay. You do get popular history, and some of those are quite successful. Like Metaphysics Club is a Pulitzer Prize bestseller, but you don't seem to have that. And you do have that in sciences, in spades, but you don't seem to have that in English per se, or in literary disciplines.
So it's interesting because the book that I've just completed for Blackwell called Edward Said, the Dictionary. I loved doing it when they invited me to do that, especially having known Said, that he was a great mentor and would always say, write for as many audiences as possible. So when I was doing this dictionary, what they wanted, here was their fantasy. Think of a situation where you were at an airport, right? And you want to buy what I would call a time pass book. And you could buy, there's science fiction, there's fantasy, and then you see, oh my God, a Blackwell book. Edward Said, the dictionary, the Radhakrishnan, and you're going to buy that book. That, they're hoping the book will sell. Okay, they're hoping the book will be something like a bestseller, that people will use it in classes and so on. So when I was writing this book, the same conflict, what am I doing exactly? On the one hand, somebody like, an earlier book was on Derrida, a dictionary. Now, Derrida's complexity is different from Edward Said's complexity. They're different kinds of thinkers. Said is not a philosophical thinker. He has something else. His complexity has to do with a certain idiosyncratic way in which he would use terms like secular, counterpuntal. So my question was, on the one hand, I want to render thought justice, but at the same time, I want it to be easily available. So when I sent in my first, number of entries, I got 2 great reports from the reader. They loved it, but they said, suddenly the author is forgetting. He's doing his own stuff. Slow down. This seems like an insider conversation. Or this already seems to assume what the term is. So that's a great check for me to see where I had earned the right to do that, the John Coltrane kind of thing. Music is a good example. If you're a musician, who are you performing for? I mean, it's always, what if you go there and do your own thing? And the crowd says, cut it out, pal, do this in your own studio. You're just communing with yourself. Sheets of sound in John Coltrane. I mean, I don't like this stuff, but this doesn't seem like it's even popular. This seems so recondite. I don't even know what the references are. What the hell are you doing? You are just going on and on and on. It seems to be, this seems worthwhile to you. But that is the point where I guess my question is, each one of us, is it okay that the same person is many persons? I like a certain kind of complexity. I just want to work this little thing. I want to do this little thing in Hegel, the little thing, whatever. I love doing it. I'm going to do something infinitely nuanced. But who was it for? The real question is, in doing that, do I automatically become elitist? Or if somebody said, okay, Pat, I can understand why you're fascinated by this, but tell me, why does this author fascinate you? And why are you spending so much time doing all of this stuff? Will I be in a position to make a connection, build a bridge between those two? And for those of you interested, if you read Edward Said and Glenn Gould, the pianist, for example, Said claims that in Glenn Gould's way in which he talks about it as the virtuoso as theorist. And at least, I'm not sure how many of you are pianists or musical theorists, and the claim that Said makes is that in Glenn Gould, here is Glenn Gould performing theory. And he claims that in Glenn Gould, the theory becomes worldly, that he's teaching it, performing it, so he is doing theory, but doing it in a way that is pedagogically available. There are some other kind of claims, Said would claim, there the theory becomes elitist, it becomes a wall-to-wall discourse, it becomes, a cultish thing. So there it seems to me is the mode of transmission and what you do with a certain complexity. First of all, justify it. Why is it even complex? Why do you have to use those terms to say this? If you could have said that without it, why are you invested in those terms? They seem redundant. They seem like you don't really need all of that. And if that is indeed the case, okay, you say, I'm going to not use this stuff because I can do the same thing well. And if that reaches more people, and in doing that, I'm still sounding reasonably insightful, why am I going for that? So, Jonathan, did you have a question or something?
I do, but I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, please, I'm just going on and on, yes.
Right, as usual, you give us a ton to think about, but I want to pick up on something very particular.
Okay.
Both questions so far have raised the specter of science.
Yeah.
And you yourself talked a little bit about science, and if I understood you correctly, you asked the question about subjectivity and objectivity, and to what extent is that mappable along the human sciences versus the hard sciences. And I say that science is raised here as a specter, or maybe a phantasm is the better word, because science is not the problem. In my position as campus writing director, I spend a lot of time with scientists, and a lot of the issues that we're raising here that you've raised for us are issues that scientists themselves have raised. Positivism aside, C.P. to cultures aside, given all of the history, scientists are very concerned with questions of epistemology and subjectivity. And when they talk to me about how they themselves are moving more towards language of first-person active voice as opposed to third-person passive voice, they talk about it in the context of understanding their own subjectivity, of understanding scientific methods as doing highly particularized things that are extraordinarily caveated and that shift from context to context. I'm like, you're talking my language now, people. I mean, this is the language of the humanities. And so it seems to me that scientists themselves are very concerned with what happens to their work as it moves into the public sphere. And as various public spheres, particularly economic corporate structures, instrumentalize scientific knowledges. So with that said, it seems to me subjectivity, objectivity, the epistemological binary is maybe a red herring for us. We might have much more in common with the scientists than we believe. Maybe the problems lie in a set of public spheres that do not value complexity, and a kind of set of economic structures that call for certain sorts of valuations that make us profoundly uncomfortable, that we understand as limiting. So, I should reply.
Thank you so much for the clarification. But yeah, please.
I was just raising. It wasn't a direct response to that.
What's your name?
Jared?
Hi, Jared. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, please. I mean, I want to make sure that you say, I've been talking enough. So I will respond to it, but please, I want to hear you say what you had to say.
I suppose this kind of comes loosely relates to that question in that I was thinking about the way you opened up your talk kind of in the middle of it as something to kind of consider the meta praxis of it. That there's obviously something, a kind of leveling going on in giving these kinds of talks, and maybe this kind of putting science at one of the negative poles as a kind of enemy is necessitated by a broader audience. I mean, for instance, having to address us today. I mean, we're just the perspectives. I mean, what do we know? So, I mean, you have to take that into account, and I think it's so important that you do that, and that you have this kind of open question of what you're saying, even as you're saying it, and your invitation to kind of think about, maybe what are some of the limiting moments in a presentation like this, and that really got me thinking throughout what you were saying, and maybe more than I would have. So already, I think that's definitely raising consciousness, which hopefully is something. And the one thing that I noticed was, I'm wondering now about the kind of anonymity of one of the examples you used. I guess it's the classic cocktail party example, where what do you do? Who are you? What do you do? And this kind of anonymous interlocutor that you're dealing with, and then also the how that relates to the potential of the humanities, and kind of our kind of battle, the points that we battle over, the ways that we often the points that we basically reach to most often to defend the humanities, saying that well, it can bring us into this deeper and more profound questioning. But the interesting relation between this anonymous figure and this type of ideal work that we're going to achieve in the humanities, this type of questioning is that, how do you, what is the likelihood of this anonymous figure ever really arriving at that type of questioning himself, herself, itself? And I was just wondering about that connection. I mean, can you still have this anonymous figure? And I'm using the phrase anonymous figure.
Yeah, I love that. Very evocative, yeah. I'm both seeing someone and not seeing someone, as you're saying that, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, because potentially these people at a cocktail party, there are some that there's no hope for, and it's very disconcerting. I mean, you're never going to have them kind of reach out into the nothingness and have their Heideggerian moment of groundlessness. So
it could even be a Schumpeterian moment, a Keynesian moment,
Yeah,
a Steinian moment,
yeah.
or a Niels Bohrian moment. Yeah.
So how do you kind of, maybe the question about, you know, a presentation like this is, how do you make that figure, you know, a potential student?
That's a great way to, would you think of it? That's fantastic.